All right, we are now live also on YouTube and LinkedIn Live. So welcome to everybody joining us from there as well. We're going to get started in just a few minutes, just to give more people a chance to join. And while we wait, please use the chat button or the comment section on LinkedIn or YouTube to say hello and tell us where you're zooming in from. And great to see everybody here, and thank you for joining. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone, depending on where in the world you're zooming in from. Welcome to this LF Decentralized Trust webinar with MITRE on AADAPT, which is a cyber threat framework for digital assets. We're very excited about today's presentation, and we are going to get started in just a minute. All right. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone, depending on where in the world you're joining us from. Welcome to this LF Decentralized Trust webinar with MITRE. Thank you for joining us. My name is Tomasz, and I'm an ecosystem manager at LF Decentralized Trust. Today, I'm going to have the opportunity to take you through some housekeeping and also introduce our great panelists for today. First, I would like to emphasize that everyone is welcome in our community, and we strive to create a safe and welcoming environment for everyone. So please follow our code of conduct when you're interacting with each other on this webinar or in the broader community as well. You can find our code of conduct on our website and on our wiki. All the Linux Foundation member webinars are held under the LF antitrust policy, which you can also find on our website and on our wiki. This webinar is being recorded, and it will be available in our webinar library along with the slides after the webinar. And it's also being live streamed on LinkedIn and YouTube. And welcome everybody joining us from there as well. Now, we're encouraging you to be as active as possible because the more active you are, the better experience for everybody. So if you have a question, please use the raise your hand button, and we can unmute you at the end for the Q&A, and and you can ask your question to our panelists. You are also welcome to use the chat button or the Q&A box to ask your questions. And for those of you joining us on live streams, please use the comment section or join us at the webinar itself as well. I'll be joining the link there too. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. First, I would like to hand over the floor to Kara Pepper to introduce the ADAPT framework, and then we're going to have this excellent panel following from there. So, Kara, over to you.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. All right. So hi, everyone. My name is Kara Pepper. I am a cybersecurity engineer at the MITRE Corporation. I work primarily in adversary emulation and cyber threat intelligence, and I am also a member of the AADAPT team. We are working on a cyber threat framework for digital assets, and I'll be giving you a quick overview of our work today before we launch into our panel session. All right, so before we get really into the weeds with it, just a quick overview of MITRE. We are a not-for-profit organization that operates research and development centers in the public interest. We have deep expertise in anything from cybersecurity to machine learning, data analysis, and more. We also have a robust independent research and development program, and we welcome collaboration and feedback there. So please feel free to reach out to us at adapt@mitre.org. That's AADAPT at mitre.org if you're interested in engaging with us directly. All right, so now back to why we're here today. Digital assets such as cryptocurrencies, blockchain-based platforms, stablecoins, or central bank digital currencies, and more have become increasingly integrated into the global financial system. They introduce a rapidly expanding and largely uncharted attack surface, though. So while these technologies are reshaping how value is transferred and stored, they also create novel opportunities for adversaries that are not fully addressed by traditional IT-centric threat frameworks. And we've already seen the consequences of this evolving risk. So take, for example, the recent Bybit breach, which led to staggering losses of 1.5 billion Ethereum tokens in just one single hack. And as many of you may know, this is not an isolated incident. So since 2021 alone, there have been over 1,000 documented cyber attacks targeting digital asset systems, resulting in more than $12 billion in total losses. And the range of threats in this domain is broad. So it ranges from small-scale fraudsters seeking quick financial gains through fraud or social engineering to more sophisticated nation-state actors engaging in campaigns that could sabotage digital asset infrastructure. So these threats may not only compromise financial systems, but they may also have broader implications for national security and global economic stability. So to address this growing gap, we developed AADAPT. It stands for Adversarial Actions in Digital Asset Payment Technologies, and it's a threat framework specifically designed for the digital asset domain. It captures the unique attack techniques and adversarial behaviors associated with this new class of technologies, whether they involve decentralized finance protocols, smart contracts, or blockchain consensus mechanisms, or more. So for those of you who may not be as familiar with cyber threat frameworks, they are structured tools or methodologies used to understand, categorize, and respond to cyber threats. They act as a common language, most importantly, enabling better communication and collaboration when addressing cyber risks. And the primary goal of these frameworks is to help organizations identify, assess, and mitigate threats that could compromise their systems, their data, or their operations. So some of you may have already heard of MITRE ATT&CK. It's shown in the image on the right here. ATT&CK is a curated knowledge base that catalogs adversary tactics and techniques observed in real-world cyber attacks across enterprise, mobile, or ICS systems. Our framework, ADAPT, builds upon the globally adopted ATT&CK framework, and it's designed to complement and to be used alongside it. So ADAPT, like ATT&CK, is organized by tactics and techniques. Tactics represent the why behind an adversary's actions. So these are the overarching goals that attackers aim to achieve during a cyber operation. This could be initial access, persistence, or exfiltrating data. Whereas techniques represent the how attackers achieve these goals. So these are the specific methods or procedures used to execute a tactic. This could be something like phishing to get initial access, or something more sophisticated like account manipulation for privilege escalation. Some important considerations for the ADAPT framework in relation to ATT&CK. Both frameworks maintain an adversary perspective, but whereas ATT&CK is based solely upon real-world empirical adversary behaviors, ADAPT is based on both observed and predictive or theoretical adversary behaviors. ADAPT also borrows many of the tactics seen in ATT&CK, but it adds domain-specific techniques for digital assets. And we also do have one unique tactic in our framework, which is fraud, and specific to the digital asset domain. And this is when the adversary is trying to illicitly create, acquire, or utilize value form. All right, so to develop ADAPT, we began with a thorough examination of established cybersecurity frameworks like MITRE ATT&CK, along with the range of domain-specific threat models such as the OSWAR framework. So this initial analysis helped identify foundational concepts, structure, and potential gaps relevant to the characteristics of digital asset ecosystems. To create the techniques, we conducted an in-depth analysis of real-world attacks targeting anything from blockchain platforms, smart contracts, decentralized finance systems, and other digital asset system technologies. Many of our techniques were derived from observable adversary behaviors and technical exploits seen in the wild, and this ensured that our framework remained grounded in practical operational threat intelligence. But in addition to the real-world cases, we incorporated attack vectors and vulnerabilities sourced from peer-reviewed academic literature, public research, and lab-based experiments. So this multi-source approach enabled us to capture both current and emerging threats, providing a forward-looking perspective on how adversaries may exploit evolving technologies. And so all of this work accumulated into the ADAPT framework that we can see here. So this is a snapshot of the framework as it currently stands. At present, ADAPT encompasses 11 different tactics and over 60 digital asset-specific techniques. The framework is actively being expanded to incorporate additional adversary behaviors and threat vectors as they emerge. ADAPT is organized by tactics, displayed left to right across the top of the matrix, and techniques belonging to a specific tactic are arranged in columns underneath the tactic header. Techniques are also not confined to a single tactic. They may belong to multiple. And additionally, some of the techniques include sub-techniques, which represent more granular or specialized variations of the parent technique. And these sub-techniques can be viewed by expanding the corresponding gray box on the technique box. So now we can take a closer look at what the ADAPT framework actually looks like in practice if you were to expand a technique. So if we zoom in on a specific technique, for example, siphon funds, clicking on it brings us to a detailed technique summary page, like the one you see here on the left, and on the right is the expanded sub-technique for siphon funds layering. At the top of each technique page, you'll find a high-level summary that explains what the technique is and how it's typically used in an attack scenario. If there are any sub-techniques, those are listed underneath the summary as well. And the page also shows which tactics the technique belongs to and any references citing the adversary behavior. On the right-hand side of each technique page, there's an additional information box that includes the unique technique ID, which makes it easy to reference or share across teams for intelligence coordination or reporting. And this information box on the right also contains a quick overview of some categorical information that is also listed below the technique. All right. So ADAPT covers a multitude of cyber threats for digital asset systems. We have anything from smart contract implementation analysis for reconnaissance, exploit consensus logic or smart contract implementation for our execution tactic, circumvent account limits or cross-chain hopping for the defense evasion tactic, reputation damage and market manipulation for impact, and then anything like generate counterfeit tokens or chain reorganization and more for our fraud tactic. And to give you a feel for some of the content of the framework and what a technique looks like and covers in depth, I'll go over an example of one of our ADAPT techniques. So we'll talk about Sybil node creation. This is a sub-technique to exploit consensus logic in the execution tactic. So in a Sybil node creation attack, a malicious actor creates numerous fake identities. These are known as Sybil nodes within a blockchain network. And these nodes are designed to manipulate the system by overwhelming it with fraudulent participants. Many decentralized digital asset systems rely on voting or consensus mechanisms to make critical decisions This could be validating transactions or updating protocols. And by controlling multiple fake identities, an attacker can gain disproportionate influence over these processes and effectively hijack the decision-making system. And once the attacker is able to achieve this control, they could rewrite parts of the blockchain, they could alter transaction histories or invalidate legitimate transactions. And this could undermine the integrity of the blockchain and ultimately erode trust in the system. But beyond disrupting consensus, Sybil nodes can interact with honest participants in the network to gather sensitive information, such as IP addresses and other metadata. And this could lead to further attacks, such as de-anonymization or the targeted exploitation of users. So ADAPT serves not only as a common language for cyber threat sharing and a catalog of adversary behavior, but also a tool that can be applied across multiple areas of cybersecurity. So you can use ADAPT for anything from detection and analysis, where you are helping cyber defenders develop analytics that detect attacks during techniques. It could be used for threat intelligence, so enabling organizations to map threat actor behaviors to specific tactics and techniques, making it easier to share intelligence. ADAPT can be used for adversary emulation and red teaming. So red teams can use ADAPT to simulate real-world adversary behaviors and test an organization's defenses against known tactics and techniques. And ADAPT could also be used for assessment and engineering. So it can help prioritize engineering decisions or guide organizations on what security measures should be implemented first. So whether it's detection, intelligence, red teaming, or engineering, ADAPT provides a structured and actionable framework that helps organizations stay ahead of adversaries. So I'm excited to say that the ADAPT framework is publicly accessible. You can browse to it at adapt.mitre.org. Please note it's spelled with two A's, so AADAPT.mitre.org. And I can also drop this link in the chat as well. So feel free to check it out. Next steps for our team include adding detections and mitigations to our framework to help make the framework more actionable. And we'd also like to develop a handbook for using ADAPT for people who are not as familiar with cyber threat frameworks. We are always looking for new ideas for growing our awareness and our adoption, and we welcome any feedback or suggestions you may have. We have a quick 2-page overview of the framework available at mitre.org. The full link is below the image there. I will also send that in the chat, so feel free to check that out if you would like to learn more about the framework. And with that, I want to thank you all for your time. Please feel free to contact us with any questions, feedback, suggestions, or if you'd like to engage with us, you can send us an email at adapt@mitre.org. Once again, AADAPT@mitre.org. I will jump in the chat to answer any questions anyone may have, but for now, I will hand it off to Rob Gallick, who's going to introduce our panel today.
Thanks so much, Kara, for that terrific introduction and overview of ADAPT. We're really excited to roll this out. It actually publicly launched yesterday, but this really represents over a year's worth of work in this space and over a decade of R&D across the digital asset space and multiple decades of work across the entire cybersecurity space, all for the public good. And so we're really excited to share this with the broader community. Next, I have the opportunity to MC a panel of digital assets and cybersecurity experts to discuss current challenges in the ecosystem from their organization's unique perspectives, dive into a little bit more about how threat frameworks can alleviate those challenges, and also discuss some future risks and where we see the importance of community contributions to the space. By way of introduction, my name is Rob Gallick, and I'm MITRE's Chief Strategist for Digital Assets, where I help lead systems engineering initiatives across both financial and technical risks at the intersection of digital assets and the traditional financial system. I'm joined today by Ben Davis, the CEO of Native, Matthew Berninger, Senior Vice President for Marsh McLennan, Takaya Sugino, Secretary General at Beacon, and Tiago Assunção, the Technical Director at the Crypto ISEC. So let's start with some current challenges. I wonder if you could each talk about your organization's unique perspectives on digital assets and the cybersecurity challenges. Please go into a little bit more detail about what your organization does, and again, current challenges to growing the space in a secure, responsible fashion. And we'll just go in alphabetical order. So Ben, if you could lead us off, that would be terrific.
Absolutely. Up first, no pressure. So yeah, I'm Ben Davis. I'm CEO, co-founder of Native. We're a digital asset insurance brokerage headquartered in London. We specialize in bridging traditional insurance into the decentralized economy and basically placing risk from that decentralized economy into traditional insurance markets. I've been in the digital asset insurance space for about 8 years now, and so I've seen quite a lot of things kind of go wrong from the cyber perspective. And it's been very interesting seeing the space develop. At the very beginning of the digital asset sector, you had a lot of hacks kind of happening on those centralized institutions. About a few years ago, that started happening more on DeFi infrastructure. And then now with hacks against Bybit and some other institutions, that's now kind of morphing back into that centralized attack vector. But also, you have threat actors also attacking decentralized protocols as well. So it's now much more of a mix in kind of targets across the board. I think for us, what we've seen as an insurance broker in the space has been that good on-chain security really starts with good Web 2 cybersecurity. And so what we've really seen is that when we've been talking with our clients about kind of their cyber hygiene and where they should be focusing on risk, they tend to focus on their on-chain side of things, so the security of private keys and smart contract auditing. But actually, what we try to help them with is realizing that really starts with kind of good Web 2 cybersecurity hygiene, and we talk about all the stuff that well-run businesses should have in place, from whether it be MFA, role segregation, building in zero trust architecture, that type of thing, and then moving into the on-chain cybersecurity. And so I really think like the Web 2, the cybersecurity is intrinsically linked with Web 3, and even if you look at Bybit, that could have been bypassed altogether if there had been better Web 2 cybersecurity and on the actual developer machine. So we could have, missed a big loss in the space just focusing on that. But really, I think actually this kind of comes down to a more potentially symptomatic, maybe cultural shift in the space, where I think people are still looking at this space as this small niche decentralized finance community, where actually it's now on a global stage, trillions of dollars in value is now secured. Publicly traded companies are coming in force. And so we have to mature and graduate as an industry to more robust cyber security frameworks rather than, just a few guys in a garage coding some, AADAPT and seeing how we go, right? So the space is getting bigger. We need to mature as it does develop. And I think that will eventually lead to the mass adoption that we're all looking for.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for leading us off. That was great. So Matt, I feel like talking about Web 2 and kind of the traditional players being in the space is a perfect setup for you. So I wonder if you could talk about your perspective from Marsh.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Berninger. I work for Marsh McLennan, which is largely an insurance broker and advisory company that oversees a lot of the insurance and cyber insurance market globally. Within Marsh McLennan, I work on the Cyber Risk Intelligence Center, or the CRIC, and our job is really risk modeling and cyber advisory for all of our customers globally. And it really kind of, as you said, Robert, it kind of touches off of what Ben just said, like, how do we understand risk now as it pertains to everything cyber, but also increasingly decentralized assets and how those interact. And that evolution that Ben just sort of laid out is kind of where we come in, where, yes, it used to be sort of these edge cases, and now we're seeing a much broader, attack behavior. We're seeing broader adoption of these technologies in general, not just as a way of maybe moving funds, but also as actual assets that are sitting on major, companies' books. And so in understanding how to manage risk, we have to understand this new asset class and technology. So what we do on the crick is, try to almost kind of zoom out and understand these at a risk level. My background is actually in cyber incident response and intelligence. So it's fun to sort of dive down into the weeds, which of course this framework is built for, and see, okay, well, how do the ones and zeros actually interact for that outcome? But then you also want to be able to zoom out and say, okay, where can an organization leverage investment for the next 5 years to improve the expected outcome of risk in this particular area? And in order to make those type of decisions, that's where frameworks are so important, right? Because we can talk in, deep threads about certain attack tactics and code does this, and well, what if you do this bypass of this particular, tactic? Sure. When you zoom out and you try to look at the whole management of that entire portfolio, that's where a framework becomes so important, because now you can actually bucketize and make strategic decisions about investment. And so that's why a framework like this is so helpful, because it allows us to speak at that high level from a risk management and investment standpoint.
Thanks so much, Matt. Appreciate that. Takaya, let's switch over to you. Can you talk a little bit more about what you're doing at BGen and your
Sure.
current challenges?
Yeah. So my name is Takaya Sugino. Research fellow at Georgetown, but I'm seconded to the Japanese Financial Services Agency. But yeah, as you mentioned, Robert, I'm helping a nonprofit called Blockchain Governance Initiative Network, which aims to create like standards and best practices for like blockchain governance through like multi-stakeholder discussions. So yeah, one of the challenges in the digital asset space we've recognized so far has been that like business players have not had incentives for like standardization actually. So the internet space, on the contrary, has standards organization like the IETF, for example. Business players have like much incentive to join and contribute to standardization processes, since interoperability realized through standardization like eventually leads to their business, or like they need to do like cybersecurity stuff like pretty well to maintain their credibility and make a profit in the long term. But in the digital asset space, you can make money quickly by issuing tokens, for example, right? So there has not been much incentive to collaborate across the industry for cybersecurity like standardization, which has been a big challenge. So that's why we believe we need multi-stakeholder discussion to educate the industry for standardization first. But as cybersecurity challenges in this space are like being recognized as more critical, like it's amazing to see like such frameworks like AADAPT coming out from legitimate organizations like MITRE. But BGen is also helping the industry's cybersecurity by creating like operational and technical standards. And what we do in our cybersecurity working group is to develop a framework for like cyber vulnerability and threat information sharing operations in the crypto space. And but for effective cybersecurity vulnerability and threat information sharing, like multi-stakeholder, multiple stakeholders must be like involved, including like cybersecurity experts, auditors, like ISACs, like MITRE, regulatory authorities, like law enforcement, like teams. But we started by like identifying what are the stakeholders needs to be involved in cyber information sharing in the crypto space. And some stakeholders are pretty unique in this space. Like for example, like we have blockchain analytics companies, we have DeFi protocol developers, like we have blockchain foundations. So we identified what actions need to be taken by each stakeholder, and we actually created an action flow for each stakeholder, and we have a partnership with the International Standards Organization Technical Committee for Distributed Ledger Technology. So we are currently writing a paper to submit to the ISO.
Thanks so much, Takaya. I think that perspective about standards is really unique, so I appreciate you bringing that. And Tiago, I appreciate you rounding us out here and talking about kind of what the crypto ISAC is doing, especially at that intersection of sort of digital asset threats and the community involvement you all are working on.
Great, absolutely. So I'm Tiago. I'm a technical director at the Cryptalized Tech, a non-for-profit organization that works together to curb malicious actors, address vulnerabilities, and most importantly, share threat intelligence with our members. What are the challenges for us? I believe one of the biggest challenges is identify attack patterns and share indicators in near real time. That's a challenge because blockchain activity occurs in seconds. So if you don't have like rapid detection and response, the money is gone. So to accurately identify attacks and disseminate the indicators to the community fast enough and make it actionable to them. Another big challenge that we see in the crypto community is actually creating secure wallet user experiences. And that brings up to some of the points that have been brought by Ben on the Bybit attack. Even if you have like a lot of security on the blockchain side of things, but you do have like a Web2 pitfall, as was the case, like a minor change in a front end can completely disrupt the interpretation of a potential transaction that's going to go on chain. So the attack vectors become extremely complex. So identifying them and mitigating them throughout the development life cycle, making sure that the infrastructure is also protected, so that whenever you're interacting with the pre-on-chain information, that you know that you're signing exactly what you believe you are doing. So that's also one of the biggest challenges, and also one of the largest attack vectors that are being used by the malicious actors. And I believe another challenge is also communicating with the different stakeholders, right? As Tokoyo mentioned, like we have a lot of different stakeholders. Some of them have like different technical backgrounds. They come from like different technology industries. So, building the bridge between them all so they can, effectively understand the language and what we are talking about when it comes to threat models for the Web3, and also tied to the Web2 side of things. That's also a challenge in itself. So one of the things that we try to do at the Cryptalized Tech is build the bridge and create some clear communication between our stakeholders so they can understand attack vectors and the potential actors behind the threats.
Thanks so much, Tiago. It's important work you all are doing there. So thank you for that perspective. You are already kind of alluded to my second question, which is kind of going more deeply into kind of the importance of threat frameworks. And of course, we're launching this in collaboration today this webinar today with the Linux Foundation. So I wonder if you could offer your perspectives about why it's important that it's be open source and public threat framework, right? What are some of the benefits to having a public framework for this? So Matt, maybe if I could start with you.
Yeah, I love this question. So in thinking about frameworks, and I spent a lot of time thinking about frameworks, you go back to sort of, and I'll try not to lecture too much on history, but like you go back to the study of metrology, which is the study of metrics and the creation of metrics. And in building from what I would consider kind of early scientific understandings of, say, medicine or plants and animals, when you look at the history of how those disciplines went from kind of stories and anecdotes and legends and myths to the science that we know and love today, where we have standard naming, conventions for things like plants and rocks and animals and things like that. That didn't happen overnight. That required an acceptance of, say, Latin roots for naming plants, right? And so if I hold a plant and you hold a plant, we decide it's the same one, and we can do experiments on it and agree on the outcomes of those experiments. And that's kind of, a lot of work has gone into cybersecurity, but I often think that's kind of where we are in cybersecurity, that we're in this place where we're trying to decide, are these the same thing that we're talking about? And if so, can we apply a mitigation to this? And if you see this mitigation working in your experiment and I see it working, now we've reproduced results and we're doing science and we can come to a conclusion that this mitigation does in fact have an effect, right? And as trivial as that may sound, you do that a couple thousand times, a couple million times, and you have a scientific discipline where you're getting to facts and to actual understandings of the environment. And that's kind of how I view this, that these buildings of these frameworks, and look, when attack first came out in 2013, certainly it was imperfect, right? And we've continued to adapt that, pun intended, to the needs of the community. But you look now where we are in 2025 and how widely adopted that framework is. And anyone who is working in cybersecurity pre-attack, you may remember some of the confusions around, well, what do you, I call it DLL hijacking. What do you call it, right? And like now we can see that those are the same. And so it's improved the conversation, the sharing of information, the reproducibility of results. That all of those things build on top of the foundation of a shared understanding. And that shared understanding is built on a framework. And even when those disagreements come up, that is in and of itself a productive conversation, right? And so that is, I think, the benefit why really any, measurement or framework kind of has to be a community resource, because if you don't get people agreeing on it, then what good is it? And so that's where I see a lot of the benefits. And again, the extensibility of the framework. I think that was one of the powers really of the attack framework versus other ones that were in the mix at the time, is that ability to say, okay, I'm at the defense evasion level here and I'm abstracting to that, but I want to drill all the way down to the code and talk about how this thing actually executes. And then I want to zoom all the way back up and aggregate that back up to my larger macroeconomic understanding. That is a really powerful thing we have here. And so for me, it's just exciting because it allows us, again, to traverse that space from the boardroom and the investment conversation all the way down to, okay, how are we configuring the firewall? And like that's how the game is played.
Thanks so much, Matt. And as a great books major, I love the discussion there, the preamble there. We have to have maybe a longer TED talk about that at some point, but that's a different conversation. I think, Tiago, I think that's a good setup for you in terms of like, how it enables communication for stakeholders, et cetera. So I wonder if you could kind of add anything more to Matt's comments.
Absolutely. No, I think Matt was right on top of it, and it's like a science in itself, and we know it's not trivial, although it may sound like. So identifying attack patterns and trying to create a standardized way to communicate them, in not only that it is technically sound, but also that it is easy to perceive and be understandable by different stakeholders and apply to different scenarios. So absolutely, I mean, and especially now with the Web3 side of things, as blockchain or the blockchain infrastructure, but also like smart contracts execution. And then we were talking recently about wallets user experience. So it's also complex in itself, right? Then you go and you have like decentralized finance with extremely complex protocols, and all of these parts, all of these components, all of these layers can actually be modeled by the threat framework that ADAPT is providing. So I believe that's the great value of it. And ultimately, of course, being able to communicate to the different stakeholders, the different engineering teams, but also be communicating with a management and executives in a way that they can actually understand the risk and the threats behind it.
Yeah, I love the way you put that, Tiago. Right, I think the naming, cataloging, modeling in a framework helps break down complexity. So that's terrific. Takai, I wonder if you could add a little bit more, especially to the standards conversation and from the BGen perspective.
Yeah, open source public frameworks and standards, yeah, quite important, especially, since this industry still has like many startups that lack like sufficient funds to hire like cybersecurity experts and like allocate substantial resources to like cybersecurity measures, right? So if those frameworks and standards that they can also take advantage of are open source and public, it would be definitely beneficial for them as well. And additionally, like public open source like materials can be needed to be like kept up to date through like receiving feedback from various individuals and organizations. And somebody already mentioned, but like this industry is like growing fast, right? So it's important for frameworks and standards to be kept up to date, and also like open source public nature aligns with the culture of the digital asset space anyway. So it's definitely important to be like public and like open source. And also when it comes to like creating standards and frameworks, as Matthew mentioned, we have different stakeholders, so it's important to like integrate their opinions into frameworks and standards. So multi-stakeholder discussion is important, and yeah, so which is what Begin is doing. And yeah, thank you, MITRE and Crypto Isaac, for joining our discussion anyway. But yeah, I think this is my perspective about importance of open source and public framework.
Yeah, thanks, Takaya. And I think, as you said, I think the standards work is sometimes looked at boring, but it's not boring because it's sort of the foundation toward the dollars and cents and how you measure risk. And so, Ben, with that, I'll put it back to you. How do you think about how threat frameworks can kind of enable you to better quantify risk as you kind of enter that burgeoning Web3 churn space?
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think, there's been some great points already kind of brought up, and something Takaya kind of mentioned just now about having a decentralized way of classifying these, really resonates with the decentralized community. And it really got me thinking that actually at the end of the day, in the digital asset community, there is a sense of kind of we're all in this together. And when you see these hacks and the loss of funds, we don't really, as a community, get the same backstop that the traditional financial industry has, right? When the 2008 global banking crisis meltdown, the government stepped in to bail everybody out. When FTX happened, Terra Luna happened, 3AC, Celsius, BlockFi, when they all went down, no one came to bail us out. And so actually by providing this framework, it actually gives clarity to the ultimate holders of risk, which has been the retail investors, of what's happened and how it went wrong and where the money went. And so it is this like accountability thing that I think we should demand from our service providers, that they do hold themselves to a certain standard. And when things go wrong, and if there has been funds that have been lost, we put our hands up, we say we messed up and this is how we messed up, and link that to a publicly available database and standard nomenclature that people can then start building up a database of these attacks. And we link them all together under kind of that standard language. And kind of speaking from the insurance industry, standard language is very, very important. And Matt, I'm sure will back me up here as well, as when you have policies that follow a standard process and format, you have much more clarity from the client to what they're buying. If you have a fractured market where some insurers call it property, some call it digital assets, some call it data, some call it money, some call it securities, there's a ton of confusion as to what we're actually covering and where that risk is actually being transferred. And so I'm actually really excited about having the standard framework and wording applied to the insurance industry. And then what that eventually ends up becoming is an increased level of confidence for new insurers entering into the space, bringing more capacity and capital in the space, which then standardizes policy terms and then lowers the premium for everybody. We've pretty much been insuring digital assets as a London market for about 10 years now. And there's been different ways of kind of ensuring this space that have cropped up. But I think what the next 10 years is going to bring is a much more standardized process. And I think having this framework is going to really propel that and support that.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Ben. I think you said two things that are really important, right? First is that in digital assets, you're shifting sort of the locus of responsibility from, in some ways, the organization, right? So you're taking your digital assets out of your bank and perhaps self-custodying. And so you're shifting that responsibility to the user, which is kind of a different way than we've interacted with the financial system over the last several centuries, really. And so public goods can help us demand a higher level of responsibility from the services we're using. And then I think the second thing is your point about the nomenclature, right? I mean, financial regulators across the US and abroad, we talk about crypto assets, digital assets, cryptocurrency. I mean, there's 6 names just for that, right? And there's different things within that name. And so that standardization, I think, is great. Let's peer into the crystal ball and talk about the future a little bit. So what do you all see as sort of some future risks in this space? And what are some important ways the community can contribute to kind of engaging and preparing for some of those risks? I know we already previewed them, but I wonder if you could all offer a little bit more of your perspective on what you see again as the emerging risks and what the community can do to kind of combat those. Tiago, maybe we can start with you, if that's all right.
Absolutely. So I believe future risks that I do see right now is, number one, of course, if we don't come up with good standards to help us shape, model security risks, but at the same time apply those, fundamental aspects of frameworks to building safer, not just blockchain systems, but systems as a whole. I do see a future that things will become even more complex and harder to control and predict. And when it comes specifically to Web3 and crypto, I believe that's especially important because when you think about Web2 infrastructure, such as cloud computing or even your operating system, they should be secure, yes, but they don't have to as much as a crypto or a blockchain platform. When you think that you launch these systems, you launch a blockchain, you launch a bridge, and you have hundreds of millions of dollars already locked on these systems. So security must be built from the very beginning when it comes to crypto and blockchains. So again, I do believe that a safer future will depend a lot on better frameworks and a lot of, as we call it, like shift to the left. When you were working from the very beginning, thinking about security from design and creating more resilient code from the very beginning. So I do see a future that will be better for the benefit of the whole ecosystem if all the foundations, the labs, and the blockchain developers start thinking about this, and of course, most importantly, thinking about the end user. Wallet developers start building wallets, thinking about security from the ground.
Yeah, thanks so much for that Tiago. That's terrific. Takai, I wonder if you could add again to this conversation from the region perspective as well.
Yeah, I believe that we need information security standards for crypto business players. Like such standards could be used by, like, for example, regulatory authorities to inspect regulated entities such as centralized crypto exchanges. And it can be used to calculate insurance premiums, and also it can be used for auditing. So a lot of cybersecurity measures can start from the development of standards, right? But to make such standards, there are absolutely many existing cybersecurity standards we can leverage, like MITRE, as MITRE has developed AADAPT based on attack, right? So NIST cybersecurity framework and ISO 27000 series, and we do not need to do everything from scratch. There are a lot of exploits and incidents that could have been prevented through compliance to such existing standards, as like people mentioned. So, but of course, crypto space has unique characteristics. So there needs to be new standards tailored for the industry as well. But related to that, I wanted to also mention a little bit on the Bybit incident. Like some people said, transaction signers should have checked the transaction details in advance, but actually they needed to look at the code of the smart contract that the transaction tried to call. So I don't think it's possible for CEO or a non-engineer to do that. So I think it's not that easy. So there needed to be appropriate personnel and operational controls to prevent social engineering that caused the wallet UI manipulation and smart contract swap in the first place. So Information security standards and frameworks should be necessary in terms of that as well. So there are a lot of frameworks and standards for Web2 that we can leverage in the Web3 space. And also for threat intelligence and incident response, real-time collaboration is quite important in this industry. Money laundering and off-ramp can happen pretty quickly. So one of the pain points we heard about real-time collaboration is that when, let's say, stable coins are used for money laundering and such illicit activities are detected through on-chain data analysis by blockchain analytics companies, stablecoin issuers can technically freeze the assets through a smart contract, for example. But such collaboration between blockchain analytics companies and stablecoin issuers needs to be real time. And they also need communication with law enforcement teams as well. So to make such real time collaboration happen, there might need to be operational guidelines and standards as well, right? So it's also it is about incident response, but we believe that we need operational standards and frameworks for vulnerability and threat information sharing as well. So it makes it easier for people in this industry to get to know, they need to do what they need to do without spending a lot of time and resources. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Takaya. So left of Boom, we have standards and also some community hardening. And then right of Boom, maybe we have some community response, right? Collaboration response. But of course, way right of Boom is. So Ben, maybe we can turn back to you and talk a little bit more about what do you see as the emerging risks to growing the insurance space?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, growing in the insurance space, I think the biggest emerging risk that has come up is just kind of the education. So I think just trying to educate underwriters and help them feel that it's not so scary, this space, and actually help kind of translate their underwriting models from what they're very used to into this new framework. Rather than tearing everything up and throwing it away, we can actually use a lot and then just kind of adapt it to the decentralized economy. So I think that's something that we have to kind of get over. I also think probably an emerging risk is actually how digital asset companies understand insurance. And that's one of the biggest things that has emerged over the last few years is because things happen so quickly in the digital asset space, instant settlement, you're able to deal with parties all over the world almost instantaneously. That's not how insurance works, right? It's still very slow. There's a lot of friction in the process. And so it's trying to help understand or get the clients to understand how to claim, what an application process is, how an underwriter looks at risk, because it's different to how they look at risk. And then try to, kind of have a meeting of the minds and get those two worlds to meet to get that insurance in place. But so that's where I kind of see the insurance industry's kind of emerging risk. But for the actual community, I think the risk for kind of more global adoption and actually having a safer space is the incentive mechanisms in digital assets to begin with. And I think we're now kind of coming out of it, but what we've had for the last 3 years is investors that want a quick turnaround on their cash. They want to invest in token projects that they can, have that are quite liquid that they can then sell off. And so investor incentives kind of were put on to digital asset companies, and those companies were incentivized to make the price go up rather than invest in security. And if you look at what's happened in the AI space, you've had a number of companies that have raised big rounds and then say, the next time you hear from us is when, maybe 2 years down the line when we come up with AGI or this model that's going to break through, and they don't really care about the short-term fluctuations in the market. I think if we can shift investor incentives to the longer-term game, that will then shift the builders to actually invest in security and frameworks and the foundational aspects that will take this to the next kind of level. That will transform the industry from a security perspective rather than kind of focusing on that short-termism that's been kind of plaguing the industry for the last 3 or 4 years.
Thanks so much, Ben. Yeah, that incentive alignment is critical, right? I think much of this conversation boils down to the incentives, right? How do you get people to collaborate, if not insurance and sort of other means. So Matt, I want to turn it to you, but before I do that, I just want to ask one quick question for our panelists. We only have a few minutes left, so I want to give us time to discuss it. And that is, what do you think about as increasingly non-Web3 native companies get into this space, pending stablecoin legislation passing in the US? How can we engage them, particularly in terms of lessons learned? We all already talked about this, but I'm wondering if you could all add a little bit more from your perspective before we wrap up here. But quickly, Matt, let's turn to you for what you think about emerging risks and maybe a little bit about that question if you have a perspective.
Yeah, for sure. I love the point you brought up, Ben, around the incentive timeline. There's a great essay from 2002, I believe it's called Why Information Security is Hard. Sorry for all the history lessons, but it's called Why Information Security is Hard. It's written by Ross Anderson. And one of the main points of that paper is this quick turnaround. And really, we've seen it since the adoption of the internet economy, that first to market speed and scale, that it's winner take all in a lot of the internet economy, and that deprioritizes taking time to be deliberate about building in things like security, moving left, stuff like that. So as we're able to push out that incentive timeline, that allows space for the security conversation. So I think that was a really good point that Ben made. I think he really covered the insurance side of it, that nobody's going to insure magic, right? People want to understand how the machine works so they can build risk models on it. And a lot of what we've been talking about today is moving out of legend and magic and myth and stories to a more scientific grounding and understanding of what's going on, and sharing that so we can better build models, and people can argue about who's got a better model, but now at least we're talking in scientific terms. From an emerging risk standpoint, one of the dynamics we've seen now in the ransomware economy, and different people have different views of the elephant, as it were, is a decrease in general of payment rates for victim organizations, right? Victim organizations are, as a percentage of organizations that are breached, fewer are deciding to pay the ransom. And so we see this shift now. I think we're seeing it in the last year or so of monetization, sort of creativity from an attacker perspective, right? If you think way back to the Tesla Crypt and Locky days of 2015 or whenever it was, I was investigating those cases. It was like a single machine was bricked, pay us $300 and you'll get your files back. And then we moved to the big game hunting, large enterprise ransomware, events of the last 5 or so years. And now I think we're also starting to see a monetization shift for attackers. And I think they're looking for where that leverage and where that money is going to come from next. Because the old ways of ransoming aren't making it, for some folks, as much money as they used to. Or maybe it's the cost benefit is a little bit different. And I think that unfortunately, the decentralized economy and crypto economy is one of those areas where we're starting to see a lot of interest and growth. Bybit was mentioned. Some of these amounts that attackers are able to gain from some of these breaches are rather high, and that certainly is going to be attractive if you're a cyber criminal or nation state looking to monetize. So I think we're seeing a rapid tooling up on both attacker and defender sides here. People getting real creative with like fake worker schemes and fake developer tools and stuff. And so I think that's where I see a lot of the energy. It reminds me a little bit of 10 years ago in the enterprise cyberspace, where we were seeing a lot of attacker creativity. I think we're seeing the same here, and all the more reason to have this framework now so we can track those changes and those new tactics as they come up.
Thanks so much, Matt. Yeah, I think that's great, right? Like not ensuring magic. This isn't financial alchemy, but actually shifting folks to that sort of longer term horizon, that longer term mindset, which requires more maturity and sort of, again, a longer term view. Unfortunately, we're coming up on time here. I think we could have this panel discussion for probably another hour, but I want to thank all of our panelists, Ben, Takaya, Tiago, and Matt, for their time. And of course, I want to thank Tomas and the Linux Foundation for hosting this webinar. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Tomas.
Yeah, thank you so much, Robert. And just on time, you're right, we could definitely go on, but unfortunately, we have to wrap up. So for those of you that we didn't get to answer your questions, feel free to reach out to the MITRE team. Kara has shared some of the information in the chat, or like how to get in touch with them, or reach out to us at LF Decentralized Trust, and we can put you in touch with our panelists. And also, please have a look at the slides when they're uploaded on our webinar library. So just to conclude, well, first of all, thank you so much to our great panelists. It was a fantastic session, very interesting content, and I'm sure that people got a lot out of it. And again, feel free to reach out to us and to the MITRE team if you would like to get involved and engage further. Just before we leave, I would also like to invite you to have a look at our event page to see the future webinars, as well as the live events where we'll be present at. Also, visit our meetup page to see the upcoming meetups, both live and online. One is happening in just a minute, that we're only starting now. Please join our Discord channel. We have a lot of real-time interaction there. You can get a lot of information about our projects and about other parts of our community as well. And if you're interested in joining us as a corporate member, please contact us at ecosystem@lfdecentralizedtrust.org, and we can continue the discussion there. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for watching. For those of you that have been watching that will be watching the recording in the future, and thank you again to our great panelists today. And we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you all.